it's fascinating to see and hear all that stuff at such a young age. And congratulations on your nomination for Forbes 30 under 30. That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Anmol, shall we get started with a quick introduction of you? I know you have done a lot, but let's start with your journey from the beginning. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here. And yeah, I think you've thrown a couple of big names, so now I'll have to make it up to that. But no, my journey actually starts very humbly. I was born in India, in an area called, it was near Janakpuri in New Delhi. So the start was very, very humbling. It was 5 people, me, my mum, my dad, my brother and my nan in a 1-bedroom house. And in West Delhi, a lot of people who do know West Delhi out there, it's rather humbling. And I grew up near one of the largest slums, and my parents would often joke that that's where they picked me up from. But no, my parents worked tremendously hard to get me here, right? So my dad moved here in 2009, and then a year and a half I followed. He worked, my dad and my mum, they worked night shifts and multiple shifts to sort of get me through schooling and go from low middle class to middle class. So that was my early journey. And then after that, it was pretty much just in my head that I have to do something, right? From where I grew up, from what I had seen, I had been given this opportunity, right? UK is one of those countries, like US, where it's the land of opportunities. And if you do the right thing, you work the right way, it will all work out. So I grew up then in Birmingham, went to university in Liverpool, got valedictorian in maths and economics, got my first job in investment banking at JP Morgan, then transitioned into wealth management, and then somehow slowly building, ended up here, but I'm sure we'll touch upon that.
Yeah, sure. But you're an engineer, right? By education?
By tradition, I'm a mathematician, and then went into investment banking and wealth management. Yeah.
Brilliant. So how did that journey happen? Like, coming from India, the standard way of looking at the careers, either you look at the, being a doctor or becoming an engineer. That's how it works, right?
Yeah.
And most of my audience are like South Asian community. So I want to quickly touch upon that. I know entrepreneurship, all this stuff, startups and all this is growing a lot in India as well. But how did that, happen to you? Was it like, the reason I'm asking this, Anmol, you mentioned about, a typical humble background of a middle class family moving from India to UK. There would have been some kind of, the influence coming back from home saying that, why don't you go into this, let's secure jobs and all that stuff. How did that happen into the VC journey?
Yeah, I mean, even till last few months, my mum was still like, are you sure? So no, I completely get that. So my dad is a doctor now. So, in the back of his head, it was always a thing. But I never saw myself going into that, sort of study aspect. I was always money curious, money focused. So, when I was sort of 15, so we moved to Birmingham when I was 10. I started working when I was 15, 16, mowing lawns, cutting grasses, tutoring. And when I got to university, accommodation tours, working in Primark, I did everything, right? So the thing was always, if I could have a little bit more money, I can make that difference. And I don't know whether I should say it or people should take inspiration from this, but my initial sort of exposure to big money was Wolf of Wall Street.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And, so that was sort of like, if you get into investment banking, like you can make 7 figures in year 1, year 2, and, these bonuses are crazy. And I was like, wow. And I was just mesmerized with this world of investment banking and making the big money. And I thought, right, if I can get into this, this is going to be it. So went and studied mathematics and economics at University of Liverpool with the aspiration of going into investment banking. But as great JP is, and a tremendous amount of experience to anyone who sort of goes into and does well, and it has that aptitude of learning and gaining tremendous amounts of money, but it's not how it was pre-07, right? So I got into it in 2021. Very different culture, very different behavior. They think, especially in the UK, it's not US buy side. And I got there and I was like, hold on a minute, I've been sold a lie.
Yeah, this is not what I was looking for.
Yeah, this is not what I was looking for, right? So someone mentioned, look into wealth management. Wealth management is a bit different. So I then went into Marsh McLennan, initially working in big risk insurance and then moving into pension funds. But So I then moved so I was living in Birmingham, went to university in Liverpool, and then moved to London. So on the side, I started doing consulting, just working with one or two founders, small founders, on their financial models, go to market. Initially began just because London was expensive, and as a graduate, I needed money, and as an analyst, but really sort of fell in love with it. I started enjoying that a bit more, and I got really into the event space and started meeting investors. And as I was analyzing startups, I got really good at figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And investors were like, hey, if you have any good deals, I know you're analyzing these companies, feel free to send them over. And I started syndicating the deals, putting the two together, and started making money off that, and realized this is where I want to be. And I said, look, I'm 23. I'm just going to take that leap of faith, right? Because what's the worst going to happen? I'm going to go back into one of the largest wealth management funds in the world.
Yeah.
That was sort of my risk, right? My bottom was most people's tops at that point. So I was like, worst case, I'll spend a year on it. Obviously my parents were very, like, what are you doing? You're young, you're doing so well. But I was like, just give me 1 year, right? If it doesn't work out in 1 year, I can always go back to it. I was doing super, super well at my job. And I went all in, and I started building these companies, syndicating them, advising them. As I started to make money, I started investing in them myself, like small tickets to begin with. I think my first check of investment was £6,000. So this wasn't big money investment, but it sort of got me started, right? Your first sort of checks. And then I realized, that the most common trend in the market was 80, and this is a statistic you will know, obviously, is 80% of startups fail in year one.
True.
Now, I identified that it wasn't because, there's lack of capital, because at any given day, $5 trillion are changing hands, right? So capital wasn't an issue. It was more so that it's such an early stage, capital as cash didn't really add value. So I then acquired a development company and a sales company and spun that into a venture studio, which is now GACS Ventures.
Yeah.
So now with GACS Ventures, we invest tech for equity and sales for equity, because and I'm talking about B2B software startups, as that's my specialty. And, for these sort of startups, they would raise to build, to commercialize and to scale. But the issue with the generalized way was they had to come up with the whole sort of financial modeling, and then they would go look for investors, and then they would raise, spend 6, 7, 8 months before the 4 months they'd already spent, then look for the right talent, then iterate with the right talent, and then they would get going. But by that time, they've either burnt through the money or it's been a year. So we sort of cut that 5 steps to just straight away, right? Okay. We are investing directly as tech or directly.
I heard that sales. You spoke to Harry, right? I mean, you're talking about how do you make the first million.
Exactly.
I did go through that journey of 5 steps. It's amazing. But I do want to go a little bit into detail. Don't get me wrong, Anmol. The reason because I do see a lot of, I've been here for some time, and I do see a lot of Indian students moving to UK, which is very normal.
Yeah,
35 million Indian diaspora lives outside of India.
Yeah.
And UK is probably the second or the third largest country who holds Indian diaspora, right? So there's so many students comes in, but even now, right, to be really honest with you, the intent is to get a job. So the entrepreneurial mindset, the shifting of minds.
Yeah.
I know everyone is trying to do that and all, but if you really go back and look into statistics, I don't think it's even 10% of the population. And everyone is worried about where's that big money coming from. And the reason I stopped you there, Anmol, is it's amazing the way you said, I started with 6K. You don't need big money, to be really honest. You don't need, millions or billions, whatever the big numbers are. Yeah. You can start small. And the reason I want to ask you this question, Anmol, is what was your thought process before you have earned that money through your job, putting that 6K out there? Were you able to sleep that night?
I think it was more excitement than nerves. So I've always been competitive in different means, right? So I played county cricket, I played semi-professional football. I was a national level powerlifter. Brilliant. So I always sort of thought of this way of this nerves that come in as these are not nerves. This is excitement. My body is so excited for this new thing that I'm doing, and I need to see it that way. Because more so than anything, it's always mind shifts, right? Because I knew, right, I've done my background work, I've done the research, I've done the numbers, and if everything on that calculative side is good, this should work out, right? So, it's always that loss ratio of like 80-20, right? So, I mean, fine, the world could burn, or, the founder can get, hit by a truck, whatever, and it can go down.
It can happen anywhere.
It can happen anywhere, exactly. Yeah. But I have done everything that I needed to do. So I had faith in that part. And I'd been waiting even in the past. I was like, maybe I can put 1K in, maybe I can put 2K in. So more so for me, it was excitement and just get it going, and understanding on my part that I have done everything that I could, and I have negotiated the valuation, I have negotiated the terms, I've looked at the market opportunity, I've looked at the gap, I've looked at how I will add another value, and this is still something that I do. If money is the only way I can add value, I'm never investing in a company. Brilliant. So far I've scaled and invested 32 companies. 0 of them were purely on money. My avenue is, what else can I bring to you? Because unless you're investing the multi-millions, which I'm still not at the level of, money is not going to be purely resourceful. And that usually isn't the case.
But most of the startups don't need multi-millions to start with.
Well, that's the thing. They think they do.
They think, yeah.
So, that's where you need to sort of change the shift of how can I open certain doors, right? Because early stage is just purely door knocking, purely grit work, purely, sleepless nights. So if I can even add, a 5% advantage into that, overall compounding after 6 months, that 5% really adds up, and they might have an extra 10-15 million out of that, or they might be a year quicker.
But 32 investment is a good number in the short span of time, and let me definitely tell you, kudos to you for all the great work, Anmol.